Imagine taking a flight across the sea and getting a message of why are you taking a flight? Let's talk about flight shaming because this is something I've been wanting to cover with you all before. Before we get started, make sure to hit that like, comment, and subscribe as it continues to support my work in this movement, and thank you so much. Flight shame is an anti-flying social movement with the aim of reducing the environmental impact of aviation. For example, flight shame refers to an individual's uneasiness over engaging in consumption that is energy intense and climatically problematic. It also reflects on air travelers as people involved in socially undesirable activities and adapted behaviors as described in the related Swedish term "smygflaga." And I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. It started in 2018 in Sweden and it gained traction throughout the year in Northwestern Europe. Flygskam is a Swedish and literally means flight shame, and the movement discourages people from flying to lower carbon emissions to thwart climate change. Stefan Lindberg, a Swedish singer, was reported to have first coined the term in 2017, and Greta Thunberg later popularized the term during her announcement that she would be taking a boat to go to COP25 in Madrid. And this is how we start to kind of have these conversations about, is it our responsibility to reduce our emissions for flights? So let's take an example. What is the emission from a single flight? And study has shown that about 2.5% of global human carbon emissions come from commercial flights. Additionally, planes emit other gases such as nitrogen oxide and water vapor as contrails that also have an environmental impact. So when the flight shame movement started, the volume of rights was projected to expand, although the aviation industry was taking steps to decrease their emissions. And you can see today that most of the flights that we're taking today are all packed. There's often rarely any seats available that are open. For short haul flights, which are small trips, take for example traveling from Los Angeles to San Francisco, or Los Angeles to San Diego, or whatever state you think of. A new Guardian analysis has found that taking one return flight generates more CO2 than citizens of some countries produce in a year. And I am guilty of this, and I'm calling myself out, and I'm opening myself up to this, that I have taken a dozen of short haul flights just the past year. In fact, I used a calculator from the Guardian and found out that every time I fly from Los Angeles to New York, I am emitting around 531 kilograms of CO2, and there are 42 countries where the average person produces less CO2 in a year. The issue with the aviation industry is that we cannot afford to travel leisurely when the planet is in a crisis. Aviation emissions could triple in the next 3 decades. The aviation sector currently accounts for about 2% of global emissions and is one of the fastest growing polluters. According to the projections from researchers Manchester Metropolitan University, emissions from the sector could more than double by 2050, even if the planet becomes substantially more fuel efficient and airlines have added carbon optimizing by their operations. Under a less optimistic future, this could lead emissions to triple by 2050. And is there a way from the aviation industry to actually be sustainable and be held accountable? That is something that has been asked a lot. The International Civil Aviation Organization, known as ICAO, the UN body responsible for limiting the carbon footprint from international air travel, is introducing a scheme aiming to offset airlines to purchase these carbon credits rather than burn less fossil fuels. And for example, you may have seen carbon offset programs just opening up in your own airlines. I recently saw this in United Airlines when I started to read that they offset their flights, but I was even skeptical about these greenwashing mechanisms, as we know that carbon offsets have a very huge history of being misleading. In my personal experience with shaping about my environmental impact with the first flight I ever took, it was when I was around the age of 17. I just got into UC Berkeley and was given a free flight from Southwest going from Burbank to Oakland Airport. And that was the very first time I remember taking the flight and actually laughing at myself because I was telling a person is how do I actually get my seatbelt buckled up? And growing up my entire life, I never traveled. Actually, I stayed locally within Los Angeles because my parents didn't really have any money to travel anywhere. It wasn't until I would say that from the ages of 18 and 21, I was taking around an average of 15 to 20 flights within the span of 4 years, because as a college student, sometimes I had money to buy a flight, and flight tickets were really expensive as a college student. I remember they were around like $100 to $200 on average, and that itself was so expensive. So honestly, most of the times I would be taking car rideshare apps that were available to UC Berkeley students or UCLA students, and that's how I would get through. And the truth is that I didn't really start taking as much flights until I was 24, 25, and 26. This is where obviously my career started to accelerate, and I started to actually be invited to different conferences to speak at and to different programs. And that's when I started to notice that my own carbon footprint is in fact increasing because I'm traveling so much for work. So when people ask me, and I get messages reading, why are you taking flights if you know that they're huge carbon polluters? Or why are you going to a climate conference when there is so much flight pollution and you don't need to be there? And the truth is that, global north individuals that do take more flights than those in the global south, that definitely needs to be examined. I'm not here to say that, we shouldn't be ignoring it, but what I do argue for most cases is that, as for many Black, Indigenous people of color, I will never examine or judge another individual that takes a flight, whether that's for work, whether that's for vacation, or whether that's reconnecting to their culture. For a lot of us, we have to remember that we are immigrants. A lot of us have been displaced, and our lands have been desecrated due to colonialism. And so reconnecting to our lands is something that should be given to us, and it should be a right for all of us to be able to reconnect to our culture. But the other part is the fact that responsibilities and opportunities for people in the global north in the environmental movement, they're not equitably redistributed. And the truth is that, who am I to tell someone who is Black or Indigenous or a person of color that they shouldn't be taking a flight? Should I be telling my friends that have leisurely a lot of money to be mindful of flights? Absolutely. I think the conversation about how can we take less flights, how can we lower our carbon emissions, should be always prioritized. And I think that is something that is very actively being said. But the truth is that a lot of us are operating in a society where we're already experiencing time poverty. For a lot of us, taking a 4-hour train ride is not as feasible to our health or feasible to where we have to go. And so taking a 1-hour flight is actually much more sustainable for us to save time to be able to rest. And I think this is what capitalism does really great, and is actually robbing time from us into making sure that, why are you taking a flight that is actually more accessible than the train? And the truth is, in the United States, our public infrastructure is completely disinvested and horrible, right? When I moved to the East Coast, I realized that we had more trains than in Los Angeles, and you can actually get to more places in different states. And those tickets still cost money. They're not as accessible as you may think. And so I think that this flight shame idea has become this supremacist type of thinking of shaming individuals and throwing binary statements out there. Whether you're someone that's like, I don't eat meat, or I use plastic, or these other things. Like, we have attached these green dominant values to ourselves to actually inflict sometimes pain. And I think that there is some question to be of interrogation for all of us to say, yes, I want to reduce my flights, but how do we make our work more local, when the truth is, like, a lot of those opportunities are not equitably redistributed? If we look at our white environmental colleagues and counterparts, they literally are the ones who are always given these opportunities. They're always the ones that are given more grace to be able to take these events. And a lot of us don't really give ourselves that grace to say, it's okay for you to take this flight. And I think with the global south, like, yes, it is a privilege for a lot of people in the global north to take flights, and I think that is a result of capitalism and exploitation. And I would hope that our work actually becomes more local, where we don't really necessarily have to travel to these international climate conferences to talk about our work. Right? I want to be able to talk to my community, those local children who come from my area and background like me, and inspire them. But the truth is, like, there is no financial compensation or resources being allocated to those opportunities. So I think with the flight shame movement, there are a lot of valid critiques, and I like to say always to separate the symbol of an individual from what they represent and look at the system, right? So I try to be like, I don't want to question my friends and being like, why are you taking the flight? I think we all know that, we all have an impact, but looking at the system of like, is this actually sustainable for me to actually be taking flights for the next upcoming 10 years of my career? Absolutely not. But as a young person, I do feel a bit frustrated that all these elderly and older people in the environmental movement, or predominantly white, are the ones that are spewing this out, yet they are the ones who have been always at these climate conferences since they were in their 20s. And so we are the ones now having to be having these active conversations with our community, blaming ourselves about who should be taking a flight, who shouldn't be taking a flight. And it's honestly tiring. And I think that I don't need to ever explain myself why I'm taking flights anymore. But I do have a responsibility for all of you here watching this video that I am trying to reduce my flights, which is why I'm thinking about actually looking more into local work the next year. But that also comes with the price of actually not getting as much funding that I should be for my team, for my family, for myself. And this is where it becomes a very parasitic relationship of like, well, who's able to actually freely not take flights and able to use a car or not use a car and live in a 20-minute neighborhood where they're close to the hospital, their grocery stores, the local bus stop, the mail postal office. That never existed for me. And I grew up taking an entire bus my entire life in Los Angeles. And that's not to say that I'm excused from all of those actions, but it just means that I really have realized that how much are we going to start to shame individuals just for their existence of their lifestyle when it's not so much that they're traveling for leisure. A lot of us travel because of work. If I didn't have to work, I wouldn't be traveling over there. And that's the case. Now, when it comes to celebrities, that's a different conversation, and we're gonna get into it. Jet-owning celebrities taking journeys lasting mere minutes and being named and shamed via the account Celeb Jets, as you may have seen. This Twitter account is actually run by a 19-year-old that started to examine the flights that celebrities were taking, and one of the shortest flights I think was recorded around 10 to 13 minutes and was literally within the Los Angeles region. We're not gonna name names here to avoid any lawsuits. Now, I'm not here to call out these celebrities, but here's the chart actually that showcases the amount of celebrities that are in the top 10 category. And one of the things that I feel that should be talked about is how do we hold celebrities accountable with the flight shaming movement? And I think there is this opportunity for education. And I know that sometimes certain celebrities take the jets because of national security issues or whatever you may call it, but the truth is, like, how do we get them to be held accountable? And I found that, in my view, is that I don't really have the energy to focus on a celebrity or a very high-level political figure telling them why they're taking flights, right? I think I will be asking that question if I know them more personally, but the truth is that I feel that other celebrities should be having that conversation with their own friends, because if they're the same ones who are saying, well, don't shame this individual for taking flights, then what are you as a celebrity with power and resources doing to hold your other celebrity friend accountable? And that's where that should happen. I do think that it's really ridiculous to see the amount of private jets that are being flown within the same area when you can literally just take a car. And not saying that the car is like a sustainable option either, but it's a less intensive carbon footprint, right, than a private jet. And so you've seen that many activists in the recent weeks have actually shut down private jet areas within the United States or Netherlands. And this is actually to make a statement of celebrities and political figures should stop taking these private jets to these conferences, to these events, or to leisurely travel, because it's literally unsustainable. We don't have the amount of resources to continue to hold those the planet and to actually maintain the structure in which we're working with. And so I think in my realm, like, there's a really great organization called Flight Free UK. They actually focus on flight education. It's not so much that they're focusing on shaming an individual, but they actually get people to pledge to go flight free. They actually make sure to encourage you to learn about the information, because I do think it is important for the average consumer and the average traveler like myself and my other friends that are like in their mid-20s, they have their jobs, to kind of start to understand what is the impact of this industry and can it actually be sustainable. And currently I don't think it can be sustainable at its current rate, And I think that biofuels and other fuels are coming out to say that it's a more green alternative, which it may be the option, quote unquote, but I don't really trust it. And I think that due to global capitalism, we're going to continue seeing flights exist, right? We'd love to see the death of the fossil fuel industry, the flight industry, the industrial agriculture industry, but these industries are all profitable still, and they're continuously being profitable. So what that means is that the challenges that we're going to have is actually finding out what are the ways in which we divest slowly as a culture to say no to these industries. And that is something that's going to be a very hard cultural shift that's going to happen in the upcoming years. But I do believe that it can happen, but I do think that, I'm very conflicted about flights and what they're doing to the earth and how I'm partaking in that system. Anyways, I'd love to hear your thoughts about flight shaming. Do you actually think it's a sustainable option? For many people, they would say no, but I'd like to hear your thoughts and experience on this issue. And make sure to subscribe, like, and comment on this video because honestly, I really need your support, and this actually continues to help me create free educational resource videos for you all.